Hello, guess what? It's pastry week.
That's right, it's pastry week. And around this time of year, pastry stouts are popping up everywhere. The cool weather calls out for big ABV with a sweet finish. Perfect to warm the bones. Having never brewed one before, I thought I'd give it a go, putting my own spin on it by infusing the flavors of chocolate and cherry in this Black Forest cake stout. I'm Trent Musho, and this is the Brew Show. Let's brew a pastry stout. Pastry stout, if you're not familiar, is a stout that's high in ABV and heavy with adjuncts that are reminiscent of a dessert, or can even be made with said dessert. In my eye, a pastry stout has a thicker mouthfeel, a sweet finish, and a strong alcohol content, anywhere from 8% or higher. These beers are not an official style of beer and are rather new, so there's a lot of fudging with ingredients you can do. See what I did there? Some people see pastry stouts as a way to throw in a buttload of their favorite dessert right into the mash and call it beer. But in my opinion, that rarely does enough to give the flavor you're looking for. That's why today, you won't see me throw in a whole cake, but instead use beer ingredients with a few select adjuncts to give the impression of a Black Forest cake. A Black Forest cake is a traditional German dessert, made from chocolate sponge that's soaked with cherry liqueur or syrup, then layered with whipped cream and topped with more cherries. How could this not be made into a beer, right? Well, that's exactly what I set out to do. Let me show you how I did it. First, a huge thank you to the partners that support this channel. Northern Brewer, who supplied all the ingredients for this brew, and Clawhammer Supply, which I'll be brewing on their electric 120 volt system. I have links in the description for both of these if you're interested to know more. And don't worry if you don't have an electric system. You can totally brew this same recipe on a simple brew in a bag setup like I've shown many times before. Let's start with the grain bill, which is one of the more complex ones I've done in this channel. 34% pale malt, 34% Pilsner malt. These two will be our main fermentables, and I only mixed them up because I had both. So you could totally just pick one of these or mix it at a different ratio. 21% Flaked Oats to really build up that body and mouthfeel. 3% pale chocolate. This will give us a bit of color, but also a good chocolate flavor. 2% Carafa II, mainly just for the color. 1% Caramunich for some added complexity and caramel sweetness. And 1% Roasted Barley for that last bit of color boost and a roasty, chocolatey goodness. The final 4% will come in the form of pure black cherry juice that I'll add in later. Before I even jumped in, I had a little bit of a hurdle to overcome. I designed this recipe to hit OG above 1.110, which means we'll need a lot of grains, way more than I've used before, and way more than I can fit in this 10-gallon kettle. I think I had like 30 pounds total grains here. So what I decided to do was break this into two mashes, or what's called a reiterated mash. This is where I'll take half of the grains and mash normally, and then remove those grains from mash 1 and add in the rest of the grains for a second mash, using that wort as our strike water. This was a first for me, but to save some of the headache of removing the grains, I placed a brew bag inside the metal basket for mash 1. I added half the grains, excluding all the roasted grains, and I only used half of the water. I mashed that at 158 Fahrenheit for 45 minutes. This higher mash temp should help promote more residual sweetness and a thicker body. After the 45 minutes, I lifted up the grain basket so that I could sparge the grains with the remainder of the water. I then lifted up and pulled out the bag, leaving behind just the wort and an empty basket ready for the rest of the grains in mash number 2. The reason I'm saving the roasted grains until mash 2 was because I didn't want to extract too much harshness from them, which can lead to some ashy or acrid flavors in the beer. I want this to taste like chocolate, not like a cigar. I let mash 2 go for 45 minutes as well. After the timer went off, I pulled out the grains. And man, I got my workout this day. Swole! Now to really improve my chances of increased original gravity, I decided to boil this for 90 minutes to really concentrate this wort. And at the top of the boil, I added in the only hop addition, 1.25 ounces of Warrior for about 53 IBUs. And then I just let it rock for an hour and a half. This was probably one of the longest brew days I've ever had, but it was definitely worth it. Since the OG was predicted to be so high, I decided it would be best to plan this brew day the same day as I was kegging up another batch, so that I could use the yeast from that beer to power this fermentation. It would ensure I had a strong yeast cell count to limit off flavors and make sure they could chew through all these sugars with ease. So here's the fermenter from the ube beer that I made for Halloween. I did my best to keep things sanitary and keep the lid closed until it was ready. I didn't rinse or wash the yeast, I just opened it up and then first added in one of these jugs of black cherry juice. And once the wort of the stout was cooled, I transferred it in, splashing as much as I could to incorporate some oxygen, since we know big ABV beers need lots of oxygen. And I wasn't really too worried about the flavor carryover from the ube. I mean, the main flavor profile of ube is vanilla, which could totally work here, but I'm not sure how much of that will come through. Speaking of big, the original gravity came in at 1.120. Whew! I just closed the lid up and let this baby rock around 67 degrees for 2 weeks. While that fermented, I prepped a little tincture to boost those cherry and vanilla flavors that are iconic in Black Forest. To do this, I bought a very expensive vanilla bean. I think this was like 15 bucks. Hey, I never said this was gonna be cheap. And I also grabbed some cherry vodka, although I don't know how much that flavor will carry over from the vodka, but I figured it wouldn't hurt. I split the bean lengthwise and then scraped out all the bits and added it into a mason jar. I also chopped up the bean to smaller chunks and added them for good measure. I then covered it with a bit of cherry vodka and let this infuse for the remainder of the fermentation. Which by the 2-week mark, all signs of fermentation had stopped and the tincture was looking nice and ready. The final gravity came in at 1.053, which sounds super high, and where a lot of beers actually start. But this is completely normal for high ABV beers, and especially ones that are mashed at a high temp like I did. Which this all means this pastry stout came in at 9.2%. Taking a sample, it was dark, rich, and chocolatey. I was pumped to get into the keg. First I strained my tincture, removing the vanilla bean bits, and then poured it into the keg. Then closed it up, purged with CO2, and then transferred the beer in. You could totally bottle this and age it, which is what a lot of people do with their big stouts, but I was just too excited to try it out. Pouring this beer, it absolutely looks the part. A deep dark brown and a frothy tan head. The aroma has an assertive roasted cocoa with a sweet finish, the cherry just barely poking through. And when you take a sip, the thickness is immediately apparent, but not too thick, just the right amount of chewiness that lets you know that you should take this slow. The chocolate is the hero here, but there is cherry on the back end, especially when you exhale after a sip. And to round it all out, there's that bit of alcohol bite, reminding you that this is almost 10%. I'd be very curious to bottle some of this up and age it and see how the flavors might change over time. Overall, super pleased with this one. I served it up at a holiday party the other week and it was a major hit, especially as a little sweet dessert treat. I'd love to hear what kind of pastry stout you would make. Let me know in the comments some ideas you have. And if you want to try an easy sipping chocolate beer, then check out this s'mores lager I did. The perfect combo of smoky chocolate but with a crisp finish.